So then, let me say it this way then.
Yeah.
To start it off officially,
Yeah.
he's back in office.
He's back.
He's back in office. And I don't know which direction this episode is going to go in, so I'm going to just shoot from the hip a little bit, but use our brains to have a healthy conversation about it based upon our profession.
Yeah.
Because I cannot help but think this. Tim Wise said that Donald Trump getting elected is not an anomaly. Barack Obama being elected was an anomaly. And it made me think about it because he said we live in a country that's never admitted to white supremacy, that's never owned up to white supremacy, that's never apologized for white supremacy. And I had to really sit and think about that because then I went through my Rolodex of the presidents, right?
Yeah.
So who do we have? We had George Bush Sr. And then from George Bush Sr., who did we get out of him? Bill Clinton, right?
We got Bill Clinton.
Okay. Then after Bill Clinton, we got George Bush Jr. twice. Then after George Bush Jr., we got Barack Obama twice.
Correct.
Then we got Donald Trump. Then we got Joe Biden. Now we're back at Trump. And then I thought about what Tim Wise said, and I realized, based upon that timeline of presidents, I would have to agree with what he said. George Bush Sr.,
Yeah.
middle of the road Republican, white supremacist. Bill Clinton introduced the Bill Clinton crime bill. He was a Democrat. He was a Republican masquerading as a Democrat by creating the Bill Clinton crime bill, implementing it, and then we saw the prison population explode in America under his watch, specifically to the black community. Then after him, George Bush Jr. initiated the Iraq War. Even though we know that the Iraqis had nothing to do with it, he initiated that, and the reason why he won again was because we were at a time of war. Therefore, it's very difficult to vote a president out of the office during the time of war. Then following him, yes, Barack Obama was an anomaly, but he was still a centralist Democrat through and through. He won twice. Then right after Barack Obama, we get Donald Trump again.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't help but think that there may be some truth to what he's saying because white supremacy is interwoven into the very cultural fabric of society. Brian, what do you mean by that? Fair enough. So I always like to cite Dr. Cress Wesselings, who cited was it Neely Fuller, the 9 areas of human activity?
I think that's Neely Fuller.
Yeah, it was what. And forgive me, everybody, I didn't look this up before I got here, so I apologize for that.
And we'll edit it later on.
Yeah, but I want to say that it's military, education, law, criminal justice, entertainment, health, war. I'm forgetting the last 2. And she added one. And in her book, The ISIS Papers, she talks about how it's interwoven into the fabrics of culture. Because at a certain point, racism is taught.
Yeah.
You're not born racist. You're taught by looking at how you interact with society and how society interacts with you. So that's what we mean. Well, that's what I mean when I say it's interwoven into the fabrics of society because we all interact with each other based upon our cultural norms. There's inter-race interactions and then intra-race interactions.
Correct.
What does that mean? There's where you inter-race is when you're interacting with people that are outside of your race. So if you're black and you're interacting with white people, intra-racial interactions is when we're all interacting among ourselves as black people or as native people or as Hispanic people and things of that nature. So when we're interacting with one another, we are actually teaching each other how we're supposed to interact. And then that teaching gets reinforced when you go out and interact with those institutions I just named. When you go to school and you interact with the teachers are telling you what's considered proper interactions for this society. When you go out and interact with restaurants, job opportunities, things like that. The media, that was one I left out. I didn't say the media, that was one. The media is a big influencer of cultural norms. So white supremacy is interwoven in all those things.
Yeah.
Because you often got to think about, and I'm getting long-winded, so I'm going to give you the mic after this, because
Okay.
I want to hear your opinion as well, that the sheer depiction of non-white bodies in the media, just that sheer depiction alone, that right there tells you that it's interwoven into everything.
Yeah. Well, first off, I guess now we're going to be labeled a woke podcast and a woke agency. So I'll be so excited to see the comments. Actually, really, I'm excited to see the comments at
Pro-black,
the posted. And we're going to be posted after this video. With that being said, everything you say, I 100% agree with. It's just that we live in the era now where the people who created this practice, this institution that is racism, they are now in a place now where they want to rewrite it, manipulate it, and gaslight. By that, what I mean is this. All of a sudden now, when we're having honest conversations about slavery in elementary school and middle school and high school, about the realities of it, who implemented it, who benefited from it, who was victimized of it, all of a sudden now, well, this is a woke agenda. Yeah. And why are you guys doing this to make our kids feel bad about something that they had nothing to do with? It wasn't their fault. When I first heard that, and particularly from the great sunny state of Florida, shout out to Ron DeSantis, I wasn't surprised, but I was just taken aback as in, so wait, we're getting offended about teaching American history? The ugly parts of American history, the parts that, really happened, that have still implications to this day, that we're still feeling the ripples effects of those institutions, of those practices of racism, those practices of chattel slavery, those practices of sexism. Right? So we're still experiencing those. You don't want to talk about it because you don't want the next generation to feel guilty about something that wasn't their fault. And to quote good brother Ibram X, when he was presented that, he said something in my mind. I was like, you hit the nail right on the head. He said, I'm always perplexed that when we have these conversations, why is it that the people in positions of power who happen to be white, why they even think for a second that those white students are so concerned about will not identify with the abolitionists? Because if you're talking about chattel slavery, you have to talk about the abolitionists. Correct. As in, they were in positions of power in a way that unfortunately enslaved people were not, to where as though they could roll the ball forward in a way that people who were in bondage could not. And to me, I was like, that is a very accurate point. Why would you not think that your children would not identify with these liberators unless you recognize on some level that racism was that bad and that pervasive that generations of white people far removed from it still harbor some sense of responsibility for that institution. And if that is the case, then that means we still have not had a robust, honest conversation enough about racism in this country and how it is still very impactful, and how it's even impactful now to where as though when you talk about it, it's a woke agenda. We have literally been made to believe that whenever we talk about our history, whenever we talk about these well-researched sociological, psychological, legal frameworks and terms and data, it's a woke agenda to kind of make America be divided. It's a woke agenda to make white people feel guilty. It's no point in talking about it. It happened so long ago.
I think it's that doing that is a means to deflect, because as you were saying those things, I thought back to Dr. Amos Wilson. You should YouTube him. He gives really good speeches. He wrote a book called The Criminalization of the African American. I think that's the name of the book. I will correct it later on because it doesn't come to mind readily, but I've read the book and I'm gonna tie it into what I'm about to say in light of what you said. I think that white people who want to deflect from talking about that is because there's a psychological component of it. You see you in them. To what you're getting at, to what Ibram X is getting at. You don't identify, you're worried that your kids won't identify with the abolitionists because you don't see yourself in the abolitionists.
Boom.
You see you in them being the slave owners. Because at a certain point, there's a level of survival to sense of self.
Yes.
So your sense of self is how you identify yourself, how you feel about yourself, and then your sense of self is connected to a group identity or collective identity. So when you're looking at yourself, it's broader than just Brian the person, Keith the person. It's so much more than that. There's layers to that identity. So I often find that, or I believe that when we start talking about race, we might not even be talking about Joe or Jane white person when we're talking about racism, but in the midst of it, they identify with X group. I'm not talking about racist slave group, but you identify with white group. Yeah. So after a while, sitting there hearing about how white history, white people have done X, Y, and Z to black people, there's a dissonance to your sense of self. That's why you start hearing things where it's like, well, that was so long ago. Nope, it was. The Black Lives Matter movement was not that long ago at all.
Oh, don't get them started on that.
Yeah.
They lose their. I don't want to cuss, but they lose their ish when you talk about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, but even then, like, that wasn't that long ago. And, the famous line used to be, that was one grandparent ago. That was one parent ago when certain things had happened. So I think that it's a means to deflect, because if you are a white person in America and you've been paying attention to history class in America, borderline an indoctrination process. Because if you look at the way history is taught in school, America's the best. America's number one. America's never lost a war. First nation to put a man on the moon. Won and played a big role in every world war. Even just European history. A measure of success when you look at history from a Eurocentric lens is domination of another group of people via winning, conquest, or war. So you're looking at all these things going, man, America's great. White people globally have done so much for this planet.
Facts.
We've brought Christianity to places where it wasn't. We've created all these technologies. We've done all these things. And then here comes a group of people saying, yeah, that's not really how history went. You ever just try to explain to somebody how America was not discovered?
All the time.
But Keith, when I say not discovered, this is what I mean. I'm not even talking about how Christopher Columbus went the wrong direction. How he had, even at his time, an antiquated view of the world.
Yeah.
Everybody knew the world was round. No, the fact that when I say it wasn't discovered, I mean that when people talk about it, they often say like, yeah, he founded America. There's no founding a place that's already inhabited. Like, there are times I've had this conversation with people where, like, you can't wrap your mind around that axis that you're saying because he came from a quote-unquote developed area, part of the world, and planted a flag, he founded a place where people are here.
Yeah.
People resist that sometimes. Because then they start talking about, when I tell people, real conversation, when I tell people Christopher Columbus didn't found America, I've actually had people say, no, you're right, there's evidence that Vikings came here first. And I'm always like, what about the Native Americans that were already here? I mean, yeah, they were. But as far as like discovering, if they were here, there's no discovering. There's no. You just found a new place that you didn't know existed.
Exactly. The accurate term would be like when the Vikings came, or when Christopher Columbus came.
So I feel like there's that dissonance part, and Dr. Amos Wilson talks about it in the inverse for Black people, like. And I'm not going to get long-winded about that, but in the book, basically, he talks about, in order to treat Black people the way you treat them in America, you have to look at them as deviant or less than. Everything they do has to be criminalized or demonized in order to justify the treatment that you give them. So he talks about that in the inverse. I use that to help explain this. White people, when it comes to white supremacy, I don't even think they see white supremacy because of how they look at the world, which is the problem with white supremacy, because it's a global system. I also know there are white people out there who actually know it exists, know they benefit from it, and keep perpetuating it, because a psychological way of looking at white supremacy is that it's about genetic survival after a while.
Yeah.
It's literally comes down to, at its basic root, genetic survival, making sure the white race goes forward and stays in power. And I have more to say about that, but I don't want to get long-winded and suck up the time, because there's another doctor I want to reference. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, when we're talking about white supremacy, I think that oftentimes the reason why some white people can't identify that they may participate in it and benefit from it is that when they think of white supremacy, they think of neo-Nazis. They think about Nazis in the context of like Hitler. They think about those extreme images of what happens when white supremacy becomes lethal. They think about slavery and slave owners. They don't think about white supremacy on the spectrum, right? If that's the far end where all of those genocides and awful things occurred, then there's a other side where like it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It could be a case of, oh, okay, well, a black person kind of came in. I'm going to kind of guard my phone, right? Those microaggressions. When we make certain assumptions, when we see certain people of a different race. I had a colleague of mine who's in New Jersey mentioned that she was just out walking her dog. You know, she looked bummed out about the election. And she said, one of my white neighbors just casually walked by me and said, like, hey, you look bummed. Just to let you know, I voted for Kamala.
Yeah.
Even though I was like, well, she's like, well, I corrected her and said her name isn't Kamala, it's Kamala. Yeah. But she's like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, I didn't know what to say. Because, like, first off, why are you saying this to me? Yeah, I'm bummed out about that. But why did you make it a point to come from across the street to say that? And I know some people are like, well, she wasn't trying to be a racist. She was just trying to show that she's an ally. It's like, yes. And she probably did have the best intentions. But it's still just the fact that when those things occur, I mean, do you? Exactly. Because I always put on the other end of an extreme. Do you think that black people are going up to white people saying like, hey, just to let you know, I voted for Trump? No. No. No.
I didn't mean to laugh because that was fun. But to your point, yeah, I understand that there's a pure intention there, but it's one of those things where you really do got to read the room. And honestly, I feel like she came and said something to her because people aren't dumb. I don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that it's possible, very likely, that minority groups are about to go through it again for these next 4 years.
Oh,
That's why that woman came over and said, I just want you to know.
Yeah.
Well, basically, I feel like what she was trying, I'm not speaking for this lady, I don't know this lady, but from the way you laid out the story, it sounds she's saying, I tried to help.
Well, to your point, it's already started. Even during this particular presidency, not that it was any fault of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, it started with the Supreme Court when we saw the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Yeah, right. Definitely. So that ball has already started rolling. I think that this election was trying to say like, okay, before it goes any further, maybe there's an opportunity or a chance to really stop it. But now we see that no, it's really rolling. And honestly, this outcome, it wasn't a surprise because the reality is this: the progress that was being made, particularly during the Obama administration, whether it was actual policy, which I know some people can debate, and there's actually legitimacy around debating that, or whether it was just symbolically as far as like what he was representing, what it was that he was championing, what it was that he was actually kind of assisting as far as like moving forward, that became a challenge to what we now call whiteness, right? The idea of whiteness as being the gold standard, that Christian nationalist wife, husband, children, solid virtuous morals, et cetera, self-image that some white people have was being challenged when you see the progression of all these different policies. And of course, there was going to be a backlash. It was bound to be a backlash. Donald Trump, the first time, was the backlash. And then this particular go-around, with the combination of his rhetoric and the combination of our current economy, which I think is one of the reasons why he got as many votes as he did, because unfortunately most voters are single-issue voters. Right. So the economy being the number one thing people voted on, I would not be surprised if for most people who actually voted for him, that was really the only reason why they voted for him, and didn't necessarily think about the multitude of other things that could happen if he was to come back into power. But with that, this backlash, I think of Donald Trump as a backlash, as far as we were getting to a place where we were having starting to have honest dialogues about some very difficult things. We were having honest dialogues about racism, about misogyny, sexism, about ableism. We had DEI, which the goal was never to make white people feel guilty, but it was talk about how do we create these spaces that's very inclusive of everybody that comes from different backgrounds, and be very mindful of that. But then you seem to get weaponized as in like, oh, well, this is just a way of just getting, particularly they turn it on black people. This is a way of getting people of color in positions and places just because they're black.
Yeah, we've seen this before with affirmative action. When it first
exactly.
came out.
And so, to me personally, when I saw all of that, when I saw it come full circle, I wasn't surprised. I was just realizing I'm seeing it for the first time in my adult life, where like this is whiteness reinforcing itself and saving itself by knocking down things that would actually benefit other people who weren't white, not necessarily even put them in a higher playing field, but definitely kind of start stepping upward towards that direction. This is whiteness coming in defense of itself, but of course coming in a new form without calling itself racist. It's more so now just taking the tone of just gaslighting the hell out of all of us and saying, but is that really fair? You guys are always talking about you want equality. Is that really equal? That like you guys are just giving this to black people, Latinos, and women? Shouldn't everybody be eligible for this grant or eligible for this opportunity?
When you were saying that, I don't want you to think I was being rude. I was looking up the Lyndon Baines Johnson's quote to what you were saying. It's a quote where, if you convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't even notice you're picking his pockets. Hell, he'll give you his money. When you were saying that, this is a personal opinion, so it's subject for interpretation, or it could even be wrong. I don't think people really voted for him because, he's going to fix the economy. I think you voted for him because you like what he's saying.
That's a part of it too.
I think that you like what he's saying. He fixed the economy. He couldn't run a successful business. That's been proven through and through in the media. You can go online, Google it, and check all the sources. He's technically a bad business person. He's not going to fix any economy. I think what it is that anger and rage are more useful emotions than stress and sadness.
Yeah.
I think that what he does is he taps into that. Using that Lyndon Baines Johnson quote, when the economy's not doing good, when you're doing everything you were told to do, when you grow up, go to college, or for a big part of his base that voted were people who didn't go to college. So you grow up, you get a job, or you might join the military, you get yourself a wife, and all of a sudden you look up and I'm not progressing in life. I'm still struggling. I'm doing everything right. I'm looking for somewhere to point blame at.
Yeah.
I think he taps into that by using certain things: fear, hatred, anger. There's a song. What was it? Y'all, it's eluding me.
Who's it by?
Timberland said it. See a white man scared from a black man's power. See a black man dead from a white man's power. Right? He said that in a song. It always stuck with me. Yeah. You tap into that. And what happens is we as black people, as minorities as a whole, we hear certain things. If you're white in America, I would imagine that you're not too concerned unless you're a woman. But even then, a big chunk of white women voted for him. Yeah. But you're not concerned because you know that whatever policy is going to come out, you got the complexion for the protection. However, when you're one of us and you hear the things he's saying, it's alarming. It's concerning because he's tapping into hate and anger. And like you said, remixing it. We're not even calling it racism. They did it in the 60s. They did it in the 70s. Yeah. They didn't call it that. They didn't outright call it racism. They called it something else. Well, these are the laws. These are the policies. Don't nothing irritate me more than when people talk, when they conflate law with morality. Because then it comes down to like, well, if you're following the law, you're okay. At one point, it was legal to own slaves. Yeah. There's like, well, they would just follow. I've heard these debates on YouTube. Well, they were just following the law. So you're conflating the law with morality as if that's not a problem. There are unjust laws out there. Plenty of them. One being the legal owning of a human body on this soil.
And I'm glad you said that, because the one thing that always perplexes me when there's like this rebuke of change, when there's a rebuke of coming to some sort of reckoning about past deeds, is people forgetting that morality naturally just changes over time. It becomes more inclusive. I know some people say like, well, it doesn't become more inclusive. It actually, I feel as though as time progresses, we lose more morality. And I always tell people, no, morality doesn't disappear, because if that was the case, then our country would be completely in chaos, in the sense of all of us would just be killing each other because there's no sense of morality. There's no sense of value of life whatsoever. But morality, more so in America, I feel as though it evolves, and under the right climate, under the right leadership, it seems like very difficult for us to ever really get. It evolves and it becomes more inclusive. And it becomes more inclusive because we can understand that when we talk about this country that we're so proud of, America has an identity that's very multifaceted, to where so it really just can't be, when we're talking about morals, black and white, to where so it just fits one particular group of people. There has to be an expansion that's very mindful of people of different experiences, different identities.
I think the experiment of a melting pot that America had tried to do, I think is a failed experiment.
Oh, I would agree with
Because
that.
when you were talking about morality becomes inclusive, when you were saying it, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think to me that sounds like assimilation. Morality
Fair
is become
enough.
because you get what I'm
Fair
saying. Like
enough.
morality is then the morality that becomes inclusive is defined by the majority. So therefore, whatever the majority deems as morality becomes the standard. Now, a minority will rise up and challenge it if it is a threat to them.
Yes.
But which we saw with slavery, which we saw with racism. Because a lot of people, they'll say, well, white people freed the slaves. No, begrudgingly, they freed the slaves. It wasn't out of a sense of morality. It was out of a sense of economics and opportunity. That is why they freed the slaves. Martin Luther King, because I was about to say Malcolm X, that's why I made that long pause. Martin Luther King weaponized and used the media to help bring the civil rights movement to a global stage.
Yeah.
Because how can you talk about the land of the free, but you're oppressing minorities, specifically blacks? Therefore, there was concessions made out of economics and opportunity. But I'm saying all that to say this is that when you were saying morality becomes inclusive, I think that's assimilation to a certain degree because the majority defines what's moral. And then the minority falls under it until there's an uprising when it's a threat itself. And even then, the majority's only conceding to forced power. And I mean forced power by I really mean this, everybody. A minority group doesn't inherently have power, at least in the American context, because we don't rule one of those 9 areas of human activity. If you can rule one, you can enforce power, but we don't. But what happens is there are concessions made because we're now making it an inconvenience to the global image of what America is supposed to represent. I just think that the way that America is moving when it comes to this sense of morality, and this is me being honest, I don't think it cares anymore to a certain degree. I don't think it cares about being viewed as a moral compass for the world. I don't think it does. And the reason why I say that is because the person who's elected to be president, he does not care about what comes out of his mouth or who he offends. It's the him show and what makes him look good. And people voted him back in office. That's why I say, like, to make it all, put it back in a nice little box. I do think that what you're saying is possible when it's a homogenous group of people. Homogenous means same people, one race of people. I do think it's becomes inclusive at that point. But the experiment of a melting pot that America brings, I think is a failed experiment. And I think the reason... And I think history is on my side when it comes to that.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because most sociologists and anthropologists, when they hear the term melting pot, most kind of cringe. They say like, I wouldn't call it a melting pot. I would say it's like, they'd be like, at best, it's a tossed salad. As in like you just threw in everything in there and it's just kind of like all over the place.
No, I would agree with that because I think that what happens is human beings have this desire to categorize everything. For those of you who don't know, when there's clutter or chaos, it produces anxiety in you. It comes out of nowhere. That's why human beings, we have a need to put everything in order in a spot. The issue with that when it comes to social concepts is when we group people, it creates a us versus them automatically. Automatically. Like, look at sports teams. Like, people don't own no percentage of their sports teams, but they're willing to fight rival teams. Literally throw hands with each other.
Literally go look for people to beat up after the game.
Yes. And
random
you don't
people.
own no part of that team. Just random people, you're just trying to fight them, right? I say that to say this. We put things in groups or in categories to better understand them. The issue is that the moment that you do, you produce groupthink and us versus them. That is why I agree with that. It's more of a salad than a melting pot. And I also agree why I think that is a problem because I cannot help but think back to that Dave Chappelle quote where he said, if America went against China, the Chinese will win. And if I'm misquoting somebody, please correct me. But he said, in China, everybody's Chinese. In America, everybody's racist. It's too divided. We can't even teach history the right way.
Facts.
History has to be taught as propaganda. Why, in America, going back to it, because what we started with, are we teaching Christopher Columbus discovered America. Why is that still being taught in school when we know historically, categorically, ethically, morally, legally, it is an inaccurate statement?
Or how we don't want to talk about, if it was not for chattel slavery, that lovely industrial revolution that really made America international power was actually funded by free labor by the people that were in bondage.
Yeah, man. We don't even talk, like, we don't. They tried to talk about that when Obama was in office, I believe.
Yeah.
Like, literally, they quantified how much money America made off of the backs of encaptured slaves.
Yeah.
Like, literally, or encaptured Africans, I should say. Like, literally, like, they made billions of dollars, which was a huge boon at the time that kept the economy afloat.
Yeah.
And to the other point I wanted to say earlier, going back just a little bit, Keith, I do think that there's a large group of people that know white supremacy exists and know that they benefit from it and they want to keep it in place.
Oh, definitely.
The viral video that's popping back up again, the Asian guy that was sitting at the restaurant talking to the white guy about
I feel like I saw that today, and I feel like I scrolled past it 'cause something else caught my attention.
Yeah, it's a viral video, and I like that guy sitting with that white guy. I know for a fact he knows that white supremacy is a real thing because he said it in there. He said, "I want my way of life. I want my people to survive. I want my people to go forward. I don't want America to turn black and brown. I want it to be white." Like, there are people out there that know that that literally perpetuate that. And one thing I will give white supremacy in its thinking is that it doesn't think. Black people, we think too much on a smaller scale, in my opinion. We think about hoods, streets, blocks, colleges, communities, neighborhoods. That's it.
Or just our own families.
Or just our own families or our own selves or our own brand. White supremacy thinks globally. White people in America do not, at least from the outside looking in, see themselves vastly different from the European whites over in Europe. They don't see themselves that different, in my opinion. Yes, they know that there's a different ethnicity or nationality based on where you grow up at, I should say. But they don't look at themselves that far removed because everything under that umbrella is called Western.
Yeah.
The Western world. Eurocentric thinking. They don't look at themselves that vastly different because, man, I hope a historian confirms what I'm saying. You are not going to run around and see white genocide and not see other European nations get involved. Now, you can say Ukraine, what's going on there. You can argue that, and I won't even tell you that's wrong.
Well, to an extent, the United States is involved.
Fair enough, which proves my point. But all I'm getting at is that they don't look at themselves too vastly different. They think in a more global sense, and I think we think in a more segmented pocket sense. So going back to the main point, I do think that there are white people that are well aware that white supremacy exists and want to keep it going forward at the bare bones minimum to keep the white race in power. I genuinely think that because I'm often asked as a therapist, do you think racism is going to go somewhere? And I say psychologically, no, it won't. Equality to someone that's had an abundance feels and looks too much like a sacrifice. So here's the thing. If you are used to having whatever unit of success there, whatever unit of resources, let's say if you're used to having 70% of that unit and other groups are used to having 30, and we're talking about, well, it's disproportionate, it's not fair, let's make it equal. Taking that 70, right, and cutting that down to 50, so that way it's 50 on your end, 50 on their end, that is too big of a loss for many people because now it turns into, going back to what I said, how you view yourself. You're taking from me, you're taking from my community, you're taking from my family, and at the bare bones minimum, any parent's going to feel what I say. You're not taking from my kids.
In American culture, you get called a socialist when you think that way.
Correct. No, we demonize it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
We want a meritocracy, but we don't want a meritocracy. We want it in name, not in deed. We don't want to judge people by the merit of what they do. We don't do that in America. It's literally a nepotism of who you know.
Well, put it this way. Because funny that you said that because it made me also think about our earlier conversation about morality. And I had to really kind of pause while you were talking to me. So like, America's morality, and this isn't me saying, first off, American, and I'm proud of the fact that I am American. Well, love being American, I should say. But I'm also very critical of America because I'm an American. I always question America's morality because even though on the surface it seems like we're doing the right thing, the underbelly is always the problem. So, for instance, when we talk about morality, I always think about one of the biggest things that always come to my mind is healthcare, right? Healthcare is the biggest debt that most Americans have to pay off when they get sick, when they go into the hospital, because the fact that when we're talking about health, which is, I think, well, that's not, I think, I know, it's essential to being a human being, right? We have capitalized on healthcare and
Health
allowed
is one of the other ones I forgot to mention.
Exactly.
Yeah. In that category.
We have capitalized on healthcare, monetized it in a way that is shocking, and refuse to think about ways to kind of make it more affordable, if not free. When you start talking about free healthcare, it's like, are you crazy? What type of socialist, communist, whatever you want to call it, throw out there? But then I think about the morality of the fact that, but there's people who are sick who need care, and the barrier that we're putting in front of them is that, well, either you can get it and you have to pay this astronomical fee, because even if you have insurance isn't going to cover so much, and you got to really need something you have to pay out of pocket, or it's a situation we don't get it at all. And on my mind, I always think to myself, what's the morality in that?
Yeah, they did I want to say, Gallup did a poll in the 1960s asking would they want to have universal health care, and they said no, because I don't want minorities, specifically black people, mooching off the system. And it was something you said earlier, like, Keith, I'm surprised to hear you say that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You said that you're proud to be American. I don't know if I am.
That's fair.
And the reason why I say that is because, here's the thing. I was in the military. I worked for the federal government for a long time. And no matter where I went in life, America never failed to remind me of what where my race falls on the hierarchy of this system.
Yeah.
It just reminded me that I'm just another black man. I never experienced in-your-face racism until I joined the United States Army.
Well, that's fair.
I've been pulled over unjustly.
Yeah.
Me and my friend Eddie, one time in Northwest DC, was dropping off somebody to their house, and we just literally got pulled out of the car, and I'll never forget it. They saw, because that's the address when we was at 18 Anacostia Road at the time, right, in Southeast DC. I'll never forget. White cops pulled us out. They said, "What are you doing around here?" And we were like, we were just dropping a friend off home. We were in upper Northwest DC back in the day. He literally looked at me and Eddie and said, "Go back to where you belong." Yeah, he literally looked at us and said, "Go back to where you belong."
Yeah.
Like, go back to Southeast DC. Yeah. So, yeah, that's why I was like, there are certain instances in my history where right when I'm going somewhere, I think I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
America never fails to remind me that,
which is,
you know who in charge, boy.
Exactly. Which ties into the bigger thing we're discussing as far as like why a lot of black people right now are feeling really down, right? It's because the fact, and also one of the things that I think that a lot of white people don't fully understand, either because they just can't, some of them just can't, and then some of them just don't want to, which is, to your point, why, as black Americans, we have such a complex relationship with that American part. So, for instance, when I say I'm proud to be American, I'm not going to lie to you. The biggest thing when I say I'm proud to be an American is I think of nothing but black faces. I think of W.E.B. Du Bois. I think of Maya Angelou. I think of Toni Morrison. I think about Angela Davis. I think about our mom. I think about our dad. I think about my niece. I think about all of that. And when I think about all of that and that history, it makes me proud. Right? And I guess maybe when I should say specifically, I'm proud to be African American. But I also recognize all those people with all those stories have had complex relationships with this country just by way of being of African descent. Okay. So, to your point, I totally agree. When it comes to black people, and not even just black people, but I'm focusing on us. I think anybody who's a minority in America has a complex story with this country. You have a complex relationship with this country, because it's a case of, yes, because I love when this gets thrown out there, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back to one of those African countries? Why don't you move somewhere else? It's like, well, because one, first off, I've done my family tree. We've paid our dues.
Yeah, we've been in DC 10 generations?
Yes. Well, technically 8.
8? Okay.
We have paid our dues as far as the building of this country, the wealth of this country. So if anything, me personally, I feel as though if anyone has the right to be critical of this country, it is black people. Secondly, it's also a situation to where as though not even just paying our dues as far as like the labor, but also whether people want to believe it or not, popular culture comes from black people. We've given America a lot, and we know this, but it still creates this very complex relationship of, yes, I was born in America, I am of African descent, so I'm having this mixed experience of all these mixed up cultures coming together to create something very unique that is African American. But I also recognize the history of this country and some of those things that we have not fully reconciled or addressed to still perpetuate themselves, but now they're just more so subversive.
Man, Keith, I'm just be black with you. I hear you. I hear you. And I love all the black people in America. I love all the African people around the world. I actually like all people. But if I could be honest with you, man, I'm just tired. I'm tired of living in a country where my sole identity is villainized. I'm tired of living in a country where a man just got elected to be president, and then there are groups of people who are worried that he's going to take away certain rights because they're in a different group than him. Yes, you just, as a black person, you just get tired. Like, I agree with everything you said is valid. Black people, if you are proud to be American, you should be proud to be American. That is your God-given choice. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. Yeah. I'm just going to say, for me, I'm just tired. I ain't even been on this planet that long. But I'm tired. I'm tired of when we do it, it's ghetto, it's ratchet, it's hood. It ain't even just got to be other white people, other. I mean, it didn't even just got to be white people. When other people do it, it's trendy, it's popular, it's all these. Like when we do something for ourselves, it's demonized. It's unprofessional, as they say. Then white people come along or other people come along and they do it. Man, this is real trendy. This is real popular. I like that. Yeah, like. I'm just so tired of people taking the culture we carve out, benefiting from it, and then other people throwing it back in our faces. Like so many famous people were invited in, whatever you want to label it, into black culture.
We allowed them to cook out.
Yeah, you allow them into the cookout, and the next thing you know, they out here supporting people who hate us because you secretly hated us yourself. For all I know, like,
well, here's the thing.
Just one last thing. Like,
go ahead.
You just get as a black. I can't speak for all the other black people. I can tell you, like, this black person, I'm just tired. I'm so tired of having to fight to get ahead and just exist. I know Kamala's feeling this right now because I saw the quote on social media a couple times. We truly do gotta fly, as Chris Rock once said. We gotta fly to where they just gotta walk. It's just tiresome.
It is, which speaks to, I think, the current state of fatigue that, as a collective, I can't speak for all black people, but most of us are feeling. It is very exhausting. It is exhausting to have gone through this election cycle where a candidate was put forth who was very much on the message of unity, who was very well articulate, who has proven over and over again, despite some controversies in her past as a DA, competent and capable in doing the job, who was up against, and I don't care, I'll take whatever they want to call it for this one, a mediocre white man who the only reason why he's being venerated is because he's a billionaire.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I don't care what anyone says, there's no way that you can convince me, if we're looking at credentials and we're looking at experience, that is the best candidate that y'all had on that side, other than the fact that he is a billionaire.
Technically, he's not.
Well, technically he's not.
He's not.
But put it this way, one of the wealthiest people in the country.
Yeah, technically he's not a billionaire.
The only thing that you have to venerate him on, because even through this, because paying close attention to it, he didn't really have any real policy.
No.
Nothing that he really laid out in specific detail. I get not everything you can lay out in specific detail, but nothing in specific detail. Nothing at all. Nothing too coherent in what it was that he was saying as far as like his goals for America. Just very vague things. And I know one could argue, well, Kamala didn't have too much to say either. But it's still the fact that to a certain extent she had a lot more. If you actually went to her website, that is exhausting to watch. To where it's though, like to your point, someone's just walking into a position of power while the other person had to do levitation to even attempt to get into that same space and was denied, despite the fact that she was very qualified.
I don't got any words.
But
And the reason why I don't have any words is because like you hit it on the head. Like I seeing my clients has been interesting because they're worried, they're stressed, they're concerned, all these other things. And they shared a lot of the things that you shared as well. Whether you... I'm trying to make sure I tread lightly when I say this.
I don't think there's no treading lightly now because I'm pretty sure
look,
going to see
whether
this.
you agree with Kamala Harris or not,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the Democratic Party that much neither. I'm a registered independent voter. I think that I had an epiphany for myself years ago that Democrats and Republicans are one and the same. It's a different marketing scheme. That's it. They are here to keep things the way it's supposed to be as far as how it's always been. And then they just market to different people. That's my personal philosophy. Now, granted, I don't like to look at it as I'm voting for lesser of two evils. I'm trying to vote for who's going to do the greater good.
Yeah.
Research tends to show that more policies that benefit minority communities come out of the Democratic Party. I'm not saying it's high. I'm not saying it's the way we want it to be. It just comes out of it. I want to lay that as the foundation. Yeah. But I will say this, and I mean this 1,000%. Whether you agree with her or not, and if you didn't vote,
that's a podcast episode all onto itself.
Because not voting is voting for Donald Trump. Not voting is voting for Donald Trump. The Republican Party, they're not dumb. There's a lot of research that goes into politics. When the majority of the nation votes, it tends to lean liberal. That is one of the main reasons why the Republican Party doesn't want to get rid of the Electoral College, and also why they make voting so difficult. That is why you don't get hours of leave to go vote. That's why you got to go to these places. That's why we don't have ease of access to voting, because if everybody voted, it would tend to lean one way. That is one of the reasons why. So when you don't vote, you're helping out one party. Yeah. You don't got to believe me. Google it yourself. And if I'm wrong, I'll own up to it. But I got this information from doing my own research and following people that I trust as far as politics, specifically the Young Turks. I follow them a lot. I follow them a lot. I like what they talk about because they hold the Democratic Party accountable, and they also talk about the Republican Party. Yeah. So I got that information from there. At least if memory serves me correct, I believe I got it from there. So when you don't vote, you're helping out one party more than the other significantly. So that's why when people say my vote doesn't count, I truly see where you're coming from, and I wouldn't even try to fight you to be like, it actually does. Because there are times where I'm like, nah, I get it. I see where you're coming from. But when you don't step out and vote, you are ultimately helping one other party. And so for those people who didn't vote, the 34% of the voting population that didn't vote, it helped one party. The other thing I want to say, I'm so sorry, Keith. You ain't vote for this man because you thought he was going to fix the economy. I don't care what you say. You didn't. You didn't. Like, I can't stand Waka Flame. I can't stand him. And I don't want no harm to come to another human being. Yeah. But I genuinely cannot stand him. Like, just as his views on life. After a while, there's got to come a point where, when do you have enough money? Like, when is enough? Right? Like, when is it enough to where you feel like, okay, I can do the morally right thing? But I guess now we're entering into my philosophy versus his. So I'm going to stop right there and say, I can't believe you voted for him off of just the economy. Because he's not a good business person. He's not. He didn't fix the economy when he was actually in office neither. Yeah. The ramifications of the economy that we're sitting in now, those are the remnants of the Trump administration. We're literally in the outcome of his policies that he implemented while in the Biden administration. I don't know why we have to keep going over this every time. The president puts in a policy, you feel it the next term. That's why I'm always like, you couldn't have voted for him for the economy. You have to just like what he's saying.
Well, we're going to talk about...
I got long-winded on that one. I'm sorry, because it really did bother me. Because I'm like, first person that came to mind that was black and was like, I'm voting for Trump because of the economy. You know what? If you're taking political advice from a man named Waka Flocka Flame, shame on you. You got what you deserved. You took advice from a man with that name, shame on you.
Well look, if we're going to talk about it, I'm going to make it real quick. First off, we have to talk about the fact that we are now dealing with a Republican Party that is even more radicalized under the guise of evangelicalism, but also Christian nationalism.
Oh my! When I saw those numbers for the the white Christian population, I was like, you know what? I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either.
And I'm an actual Christian. Like, I love you, of all people know I love my faith. Yeah. And I was like, I am not surprised.
Well, that's the reason why all of this is no surprise. This has been something that has been in works for the last 50 plus years. Mm-hmm. And I will give this to particularly not just the Republicans, but I will give it to the conservative, evangelical, Christian nationalist Republicans, because this has been going on and been planned since Roe versus Wade. As in, okay, so how do we get our people with our particular brand of Christianity and values in positions of power? And guess what? Over the span of 4 or 5 decades, they have been very strategic in doing it. When everybody was paying attention to the big elections, it was the conservatives who got hijacked by Christian nationalists who were paying attention more to the smaller elections. Hence why now you're seeing a Senate that's mostly Republican, and you're also going to see a House that's going to be mostly Republican. Yeah, these seeds were planted decades ago, and they're now just coming to fruition. It's just the fact that we weren't paying close attention to it because we were getting these other victories that we were so excited about. We were getting so excited about having a black president. Some of us were getting excited about gay marriage. Some of us were getting excited about certain equalities that we were actually extending to women in meaningful type of ways. We were so focused on that and thinking that the tide was actually changing that we forgot that historically, whenever we have some sort of social or political progress that's actually meaningful to people who have been disenfranchised, there is always a big blowback. And for black people, we tend to forget it in the context of like Reconstruction. We also tend to forget it in the context of the Civil Rights Act, because post-Civil Rights Act, what did we see in the 1970s and 80s? We saw a big blowback with conservative, white, Christian values that oppressed. And the thing is, from our community, I'm only speaking to our community, I'm hoping this particular go-around, we don't forget that whenever we're making progress, at some point, they're gonna try to give us a blowback, and we're going to have to be prepared. Actually, if we're thinking about making progress now, I'm saying we need to also be being prepared for whatever the blowback's going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now.
No, Keith, you're absolutely right, because every time there was a positive progression for black people, there was definitely a blowback.
And that's not even just for black people. Black people, we're just a great example of what happens to minorities in this country. That also happened to women. In the 1920s, you had the flappers, you had the liberated women. But in the 1930s came when the Great Depression occurred, these women need to be back in the kitchen, they need to be back at home, they need to be doing all these things. Then World War II arises, right? Women are getting more independence because men are sent off to war. They're able to work. They're able to be out in the factories, do all these wonderful things. The men come back to war. We need you back at home to make your husbands feel like men. We appreciate your war efforts. Thank you so much. You serve your purpose. Now your husband needs his job back, and you need to be back at home being a homemaker. It's always a blowback, but we tend to forget it, or we don't want to see it. And I'm not saying it's our fault, but it's a case of having to recognize, well, one, remembering history, but two, having to recognize that is always the price that you pay in this country. And I'm hoping at some point we just get prepared for it, so that it doesn't actually happen. And I feel like this particular time, when it comes to this this election,
I actually don't
we
think
weren't
we'll be-
prepared for it.
I actually
and it
don't-
shows.
I actually don't think we're going to get prepared for, because I'm going to say this in closing, is that one of my biggest concerns, there are many concerns, one of my biggest concerns is when he said he's going to dismantle the Department of Education. One, education in America is not that great anyway.
It's not.
It's not. We don't do it in a more progressive or forward-thinking fashion. But it's difficult to manipulate highly educated people. It's easy to manipulate uneducated people. I cannot stress that enough. The reason why education is important, right? Just take history class out of it, because history, like I said, is propaganda. Going back to what I said earlier about when you're learning a new technique, you feel blood rush to the frontal sides of your temple, because your brain is working overtime to help you process that information. As you practice with repetition doing that, it becomes easier to sit and process information, right?
Yeah.
One thing that school does do is teach people how to critically think and analyze things, how to articulate yourself, how to communicate, how to classify, codify, and explain reality, your subjective reality and the external reality. If you get rid of, and I don't know what the ramifications of getting rid of the Department of Education look like, but it does sound like an attack on education. To hinder education is a great blowback to the overall American population. It ain't going to just affect black people, minorities. It's going to affect everybody, because the people who are going to be impacted by a dysregulated education system, it's not just the children, it's the older people, whoever is in your, if you're in your 30s and your 20s now, you will be impacted by it, because the next generation coming up has to sustain society and help take care of you. If they are not equipped and armed with the knowledge and skill set to do so, we're screwed. That's where bad decisions come. Innovation keeps life going forward.
You're right.
Innovation is a byproduct of education.
Just to highlight your point, when most people don't realize the Department of Education, if it was to be dismantled, yes, it would disproportionately impact communities of color, but also I don't think what some white people are taking into consideration is it also impacts poor white people.
That's why one of the biggest things, and I'm not going to get long-winded with this, I cannot, you would know better than me, but my interpretation of racism, when you look at it on a historical timeline, racism has an intimate relationship with economics. It is a pure, not by itself, but a big part of it is a distractor.
I'm going to stand 10 toes down to the next statement. Racism is the result of economics.
I agree. Yes, I agree with you. I feel like race, not only is it a result of economics, like I said before, it distracts poor white people from having an uprising. I stand on that 10 toes down, because if I have something to aim this anger and hate and rage to, it keeps us in circular thinking, as opposed to linear thinking to the problem. Instead of going straight to the problem, we stay in this one spot going in. Movement feels like progress, right?
Yeah.
The hamster wheel analogy.
Yeah.
A hamster feels like he's making a lot of progress, but he ain't going nowhere fast at all. That's why I think racism, a big part of racism is it's a means of distraction. It keeps people in the have-not category fighting among themselves. And with that, we're going to close it out, because that could be a whole nother podcast. It should be. But yeah, I'm just tired. That's all, man. Like, we back at it again.
Excuse me.
And no matter how far, you might. So, thank you for tuning in and watching this episode of Forest Therapeutic Podcast. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our next episode. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that share button. We actually read your comments when you send them. We don't respond to every last one of them, but we get our notifications and we see them and we enjoy reading them. So please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Please share, comment. This is Dr. Brian.
Dr. LaKeith.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.